Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in, whether that means lying back, closing your eyes, or simply sitting in stillness. Let your breath find its own calm rhythm and allow your body to rest in the quiet of this moment. Tonight, we'll wander far from the noise of the present and drift into the timeless world of ancient Egypt. While most remember its towering pyramids, golden treasures, and the reign of pharaohs, beneath those monuments lay the heartbeat of ordinary life. Farmers, craftsmen, bakers, and scribes each carried small routines that together built a civilization that still fascinates us today. Rather than battles or conquests, our journey will follow something far more intimate: bread. Simple, fragrant, and essential, bread was more than food. It was a gift to the gods, a tool of power, and a thread woven through every household, from the poorest huts to the royal courts. We'll explore this history in 4 gentle steps: waking in the kitchens of bakers before dawn, pausing in the palace with a queen who understood the influence of food, descending into tombs where loaves were meant for eternity, and finally, sitting with scribes and nobles, noticing the divide between plenty and labor. As you listen, feel free to let your mind meander. The edges of history are soft, and they welcome you to rest. If sleep comes, let it take you. This story will carry on without you. Now let us begin with the quiet morning of the baker. Imagine yourself in the dim light before dawn. The desert air is cool for now, though it will soon thicken with heat. A baker in ancient Egypt begins the day long before the sun rises over the eastern horizon. The Nile flows quietly in the distance, its steady rhythm a reminder that water and earth, joined together, give life to grain and clay alike. The baker's hands are rough, familiar with stone and flour. The first task is grinding. The grain, emmer wheat, the most common crop, is poured into a wide, low stone trough. Another heavy stone, curved to fit, is pushed back and forth, until the kernels splinter into coarse flour. The motion is endless and heavy, and the sound, grit against grit, fills the stillness of morning. Imagine yourself leaning into that rhythm, slow and steady like a heartbeat. Grinding was often done by women, by servants, or by apprentices, each bent over the stone for hours. Sand, always drifting in the Egyptian breeze, mixes easily with the flour. To us it might seem unpleasant, but to them it was ordinary. Teeth worn down by grit were almost a badge of age. Bread, nourishing yet harsh, was both life-sustainer and life-shortener. Once the flour is ready, water is drawn from nearby jars, cool in the early hours. The baker mixes it into the flour with his hands, kneading, folding, pressing. The dough is dense, sometimes leavened with the help of beer froth, sometimes flat and simple. Yeast, carried invisibly from yesterday's ferment, lingers in the mixture, making the dough rise slowly, like breath. The ovens wait nearby, clay domes rounded and soot-streaked, their interiors black from countless firings. To stoke the fire, the baker feeds them with reeds, dried dung, or whatever fuel can be gathered. The scent is earthy, smoky, mingling with the faint sweetness of the dough. Heat builds gradually, the clay walls absorbing and radiating until the chamber is ready. With practiced movements, the baker places the dough either inside the oven, pressed against the curved walls, or in shallow molds made from clay. The heat licks the surface, forming crisp shells, while inside the bread slowly firms. In the cool of the dawn, the baker sweats, but he does not pause. The day's loaves must be ready not just for families, but for temple offerings. For in Egypt, bread was not merely food, it was sacred. Each morning, before most people even stirred, loaves were set aside for the gods. Small, round, perfectly formed, these were carried into temple precincts as offerings. Priests would lay them at the feet of statues, alongside beer, meat, and incense. In this way, the act of baking connected the earthly and the divine. Imagine the baker lifting a tray of warm loaves, the crusts crackling softly as they cool. The air is thick with the smell of grain, smoke, and heat. Outside, the horizon is pale with the first glow of sunrise. Soon, laborers will arrive, hungry for their rations before setting off to fields, quarries, or workshops. Bread is their strength, their constant companion. For the baker, there is little rest. The morning has only begun. Grain must be ground again. Dough must be kneaded again. The rhythm is repetitive, yet steady, grounding. In every loaf lies a small act of devotion to family, to community, to gods. And as the village stirs to life, the baker continues in this quiet labor, part of an unbroken chain of mourning stretching across centuries. Now that we have walked through the early hours of an ordinary baker, let us drift into the life of someone extraordinary. A figure who held not only bread, but also the destiny of Egypt in her hands. Her name was Hatshepsut, one of the rare women who ruled as pharaoh. Imagine the shift in scene. The baker's clay oven fades, and in its place rise the monumental terraces of Deir el-Bahri, Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, carved into the cliffs of western Thebes. The air here is different, solemn, scented with incense, echoing with the chants of priests. Yet, even in this setting of stone and ceremony, the humblest food, bread, was never far from thought. Hatshepsut began as the daughter of a king, wife of a king, and mother of a king, but through skill, patience, and quiet determination, she moved beyond the expected role of queen consort. When her husband Thutmose II died, his heir was a child, too young to rule. Hatshepsut stepped forward as regent, and in time she did more. She declared herself pharaoh, adopting the royal titles, wearing the ceremonial beard, and commissioning statues that showed her with the body of a man, but the grace of a woman. This transformation was not abrupt nor loud. It was gradual, careful, wrapped in the language of tradition. She claimed divine favor, saying the god Amun himself had chosen her to rule. Like bread, which rises slowly and quietly until it fills the oven, her power expanded without violence until she was unquestionably the ruler of Egypt. A ruler's duty was not simply to build or conquer, it was to ensure the rhythm of agriculture continued, for Egypt's life was always bound to the Nile. Hatshepsut embraced this role. She invested in irrigation, storage, and temple ceremonies that honored the gods who brought the floodwaters. Each year, when the river swelled and then receded, leaving dark, fertile soil, the cycle of sowing, growing, and harvesting resumed, and from this, bread was born again. The baker at his grindstone, bent in the dawn, was linked to the queen in her palace. Both served the same purpose, to ensure no one went hungry and to keep Egypt in harmony with the gods. Unlike many rulers, Hatshepsut's time on the throne was not dominated by war. Instead, she turned her focus to trade, construction, and stability. In her most famous expedition, ships sailed to the land of Punt, returning with exotic goods, frankincense, myrrh, and rare trees. These were planted in temple courtyards, symbols of life's abundance. In the quiet language of statecraft, this abundance spoke louder than swords. The temples she built, grand, columned, adorned with reliefs, were not only monuments to the gods but storehouses of grain, oil, and bread. They became centers where the people saw the divine generosity of their queen, embodied in daily food. Each morning, priests carried trays of fresh loaves into Hatshepsut's temples. They were offerings, but also reminders. The queen fed the gods, and through the gods, she fed Egypt. Bread was transformed from a simple staple into a language of legitimacy. Imagine those loaves stacked neatly in cool chambers, side by side with jars of beer. The scent of grain and yeast lingered in sacred halls, just as it lingered in the baker's modest home. In both places, bread was sustenance and symbol. Hatshepsut's reign stretched for over 2 decades. When she eventually passed, her successors sought to erase her memory, chiseling her name and image from monuments. But stone cannot wholly silence history. Her legacy endures in the grand temples, the inscriptions that survived, and in the prosperity her people enjoyed. In the end, her story is not one of conquest, but of nourishment. She ruled with a steady hand, like a baker kneading dough, firm, patient, shaping something lasting from simple beginning. As we leave Hatshepsut's terraces behind, let us descend again into the quieter, hidden corners of Egyptian life. From a queen who fed her nation, we move now into the mystery of bread, prepared not for the living, but for the dead. The desert sun hangs heavy overhead now, and we find ourselves walking not in bustling villages or gleaming palaces, but among the tombs. The silence here is striking. Wind whispers across the sand, carrying fine grains that settle in every crevice of stone. These are the places where the Egyptians prepared for eternity. And even here, bread followed them. Step into a painted tomb chamber. The air is still faintly dry with the dust of centuries. Along the walls, scenes come alive in ochre and deep blue, preserved against time. We see bakers bent over grindstones, women pouring water into jars, men placing loaves into clay ovens. Their movements, though frozen in pigment, still tell the story of daily life. These carvings were not mere decoration. They were instructions for eternity. The ancient Egyptians believed that to secure comfort in the afterlife, one must carry with them the tools, images, and rituals of the living world. So, on walls deep beneath the earth, bakers were made eternal, endlessly grinding, kneading, and stoking the fire, ensuring their master's table was never bare. Beside the painted walls, archaeologists have uncovered real utensils, miniature models carefully crafted in wood or clay, tiny grinding stones, little bread molds, even miniature ovens. These were placed in tombs as substitutes, magical stand-ins, so that the deceased could summon them in the afterlife. Imagine holding one of these small objects in your hand, smooth wood worn by time, clay hardened into a permanent shape. They are fragile and quiet, yet filled with purpose. They were promises that no hunger would touch the soul in eternity, that the abundance of bread would stretch beyond life itself. Sometimes real bread was left in tombs. Archaeologists have found hardened loaves, blackened by time but still recognizable. They are dense, rounded, often made from emmer wheat and barley. To look at them now is to glimpse the meals of the dead, offered in faith that the spirit would continue to eat and be sustained. The loaves were not always simple. Some were flavored with honey, dates, or sesame. Recipes meant for the wealthy carried into the tomb reflected not just survival, but comfort, sweetness, and delight carried into eternity. In recent decades, archaeologists and bakers alike have tried to recreate these ancient loaves by studying the residues left in pots or the impressions left in ancient molds. They have mixed flour and water, sometimes fermenting with wild yeast, and baked bread in clay ovens fashioned after the ancient style. The results are dense, hearty, and flavored with the tang of natural yeast. Some find them coarse, filled with grit from sand and stone. Others describe a nutty, wholesome taste. In either case, these experiments remind us that bread is more than recipe. It is process, rhythm, and ritual. In tomb after tomb, the presence of bread is constant. It appears in painted banquets, in real loaves preserved by time, in the symbols of miniature tools. To the Egyptians, bread was not only for the body, it was for the soul. It was life's rhythm, stretched endlessly into death. Imagine then lying in a tomb chamber surrounded by these symbols. The flickering light of a torch makes the painted bakers seem to move, kneeling, rising, passing loaves from hand to hand. In this eternal kitchen, the ovens are never cold and the tables are always set. And so, from the quiet labor of bakers for the living to the symbolic labor of bakers for the dead, we see how bread bound together both worlds. But Egypt was not only tombs and symbols. Above ground, in shaded courtyards and linen-draped halls, others feasted in ways quite unlike the common baker. From the quiet of tomb chambers, let us return to the living world. The sun is high, and we find ourselves not in the modest courtyard of a village baker, but in the shaded hall of an educated scribe, or perhaps at the table of a noble. Here, bread takes on a different meaning. No longer coarse and sandy, it is refined, flavored, and accompanied by luxuries that most Egyptians would never taste. The wealthy of Egypt enjoyed a diet that was both varied and abundant. Where the laborer's bread was dense and plain, the scribe's table might hold loaves made with sifted flour, lighter and softer, sometimes enriched with honey. Alongside them were honey cakes, sweet, golden, fragrant, with the richness of bees' work. These were delicacies enjoyed in courtyards cooled by the shade of linen awnings. The meal was never complete without beer. But this was not the thick, sour beer of the workers, brewed as daily sustenance. For the elite, beer could be filtered, smoother, flavored with herbs or dates, and served in polished vessels of stone or painted pottery. Its presence on the table was a reminder that pleasure, too, was part of life. Imagine the soundscape, not the grinding of stones or the crackle of ovens, but the gentle murmur of voices. Scribes sat together, scrolls of papyrus unrolled beside their cups. They debated lines of poetry, copied official records, and recited hymns to the gods. Over honey cakes and beer, words flowed as freely as the Nile itself. In these gatherings, food was more than nourishment. It was a setting, a rhythm that allowed minds to work and friendships to form. Bread, though humble, was still present, yet dressed in finery, a companion to words instead of labor. The Egyptian elite prized not only the food they ate, but the conditions in which they ate it. Imagine the courtyard of a scribe's house, whitewashed walls reflecting the light, potted plants adding bursts of green, and woven mats covering the ground. Linen curtains billow gently in the warm air, filtering the harsh sun into soft light. Servants move quietly, replenishing dishes, pouring beer, setting down plates of figs and dates. The luxury here is not noisy or excessive. It is quiet comfort, the coolness of shade, the softness of woven fabric, the sweetness of bread that does not grind down the teeth with sand. When we place this scene beside the dawn labor of the baker, the contrast is striking. The baker bends over stone, his arms aching with the weight of grain. The noble reclines, lifting a cup, speaking of philosophy or reciting hymns. Yet both are joined by the same substance, bread. It is a thread that runs from the lowest servant to the pharaoh himself. For all the splendor of Egypt's palaces, the foundation was still the humble loaf. In these feasts, bread became more than sustenance. It became memory, continuity. To break a honey-sweetened loaf was to taste tradition, to affirm one's place in a culture where food linked the living, the gods, and the dead. Imagine the gentle rustle of linen, the low murmur of scribes discussing the shape of letters, the soft laughter of nobles sharing stories. In this world of privilege, bread was not the struggle of survival, but the quiet pleasure of plenty. And so, we close our journey through the loaves of Egypt, from the grinding stones of the baker, to the temples of Hatshepsut, to the eternal kitchens of tombs, and finally to the shaded courtyards of the elite. We began in the soft darkness before dawn, where the baker bent over stone, grinding grain into life's most essential food. We rose with the smoke of clay ovens and the scent of warm bread, sacred offerings carried into temples at sunrise. We walked beside Hatshepsut, a queen who used bread and abundance not only to nourish her people, but to weave the fabric of her reign. Her temples, filled with loaves and incense, reminded Egypt that stability and prosperity could be shaped by patient hands. We descended into tombs where bread was carved into walls, molded in miniature tools, and baked to last beyond time. Bread that sustained the living was prepared again for the dead, a promise of continuity in the eternal night. And we sat in shaded courtyards where scribes and nobles savored honey cakes, smooth beer, and the quiet rhythm of conversation. Bread, once coarse and sandy, transformed into sweetness and comfort, reminding us that privilege was always marked by refinement. Across all these scenes, bread is the constant thread. It was the rhythm of labor and survival. It was the language of devotion, the currency of offering, the foundation of both feast and famine. From the humblest baker to the mightiest pharaoh, from the tomb to the temple, bread was Egypt's heartbeat. As you lie here now, perhaps you can feel that rhythm too. The steady grind of stone, the warmth of ovens, the rustle of linen curtains in a shaded courtyard. The Nile flows on as it has for millennia, its waters feeding the earth feeding the grain, and the grain becoming bread. History, like bread, is a cycle, rising, falling, sustaining. And though the lives of those bakers, queens, and scribes are long past, the quiet hum of their world lingers in ours. So let the images fade now. The painted tomb walls grow dim, the courtyards empty, the ovens cool. The Nile flows quietly under the stars. Imagine yourself drifting with it, carried gently downstream, your thoughts growing slower, softer, like the settling of sand at the river's edge. The past is vast, and you are safe here in the present, warm, nourished, at rest. And as the story of ancient Egypt closes, you may let go, and if sleep takes you, it is welcome. Good night.